What were the worst punishments on slave breeding farms? Slaves in the United States endured cruel and devastating treatment. Slavery is a brutal system that's left its mark on many people's lives. Let's delve into the untold experiences of enslaved women and men, revealing the horrors they endured on slave breeding farms. During slavery in America, enslaved individuals led incredibly difficult lives working on plantations. They were under the constant watch of overseers who ranged from coldly professional to brutally violent. Trust among the slaves was shattered as they competed for a favor, often becoming overseers themselves at the expense of their peers. While the Western world had rejected the slave trade, America had developed an internal market for enslaved people, treating them as commodities. This deprived them of autonomy, their bodies, children, youth, and hope for a future. It's a painful truth that history struggles to confront. The breeding farms of that time represented the darkest and most troubling aspect of slavery's history. As the world began to recognize the cruelty and inhumanity of slavery and grapple with its moral and economic consequences, the United States faced a harsh reality. By 1820, approximately 1.5 million enslaved individuals played a crucial role in the nation's economy. The production and export of tobacco, cotton, rice, and sugar, all produced through the labor of enslaved people, drove the growth and prosperity of the United States. Despite the international outcry against the slave trade, the country couldn't change its course. Plantation owners devised a chilling solution. They began breeding their slaves. This international market ensured the sustained strength of the economy during the antebellum period. The number of enslaved people, initially around 1.5 million, grew to an astonishing 4 million within 4 decades. This practice became known as slave breeding. Large farms were established in Maryland and Virginia with the specific purpose of producing more enslaved people. This guaranteed a constant supply of enslaved people for the Deep South. Legal complications within the United States allowed this terrible practice to take place. While figures like William Wilberforce and Christian groups fought to end slavery in the British Parliament, a significant moment occurred in 1807 when the Slave Trade Act was passed, effectively ending the Atlantic slave trade and marking a step towards stopping the horrific treatment of enslaved people. However, the situation in the United States was different. The country was experiencing a significant expansion in farming, with the invention of the cotton gin leading to a dramatic increase in cotton production. The nation's territories were constantly expanding westward, and the cultivation of sugarcane and rice continued to grow. Despite growing international pressure to end the slave trade, the United States was at a critical crossroads. On January 1, 1808, a U.S. law banned the importation of enslaved people from Africa, following the lead of the British. However, the U.S. adopted a cruel natural increase system to sustain its agricultural workforce. Enslaved individuals on plantations suffered immensely, losing their dignity and humanity. It's important to acknowledge that experiences vary based on various factors. Enslaved individuals had to work long hours in the fields, often without sufficient food. This was especially difficult for those on smaller, struggling farms who frequently went hungry. The conditions for plantation enslaved people were extremely basic, offering little comfort or relief from their harsh lives. Within the boundaries of a plantation, it was rare to find anything beyond a dirt floor with no furniture. Violence was a constant threat for many enslaved people, often inflicted by overseers. The overseers and drivers were crucial in maintaining the hierarchy between slave owners and enslaved individuals. On larger plantations, overseers were particularly significant, and their presence gave slave owners a degree of separation from the direct brutality. Overseers were responsible for enforcing discipline, ensuring productivity, and punishing perceived infractions or acts of resistance. Their methods of punishment were often cruel and served to instill fear and maintain control. When it comes to slave breeding farms, the punishments inflicted were designed to break the spirits of the enslaved individuals and keep them submissive. These punishments were physical and psychological, aimed at dehumanizing and demoralizing those trapped within the breeding system. One horrifying punishment that was commonly used on slave breeding farms was called whipping to the tree. This punishment involved tying the enslaved person to a tree, fully exposing their back and subjecting them to brutal whipping. The whip used was typically made of leather or rawhide, with multiple lashes containing bits of metal or bone embedded in them. The purpose was to inflict excruciating pain and leave permanent scars as a reminder of their punishment. A brutal punishment called the bullwhip was used on these farms. It was a long, heavy whip with a handle and knotted cords at the end. Its purpose was to mercilessly lash the bodies of enslaved people, causing severe cuts, bruises, and torn skin. The sound of the whip cracking through the air intensified the terror it instilled, leaving lasting physical and psychological scars on the victims. The bullwhip wasn't just about causing pain, it had a broader goal. Its presence was meant to inspire fear in those who witnessed its use. By subjecting individuals to its agonizing lashes, slave owners aimed to deter any rebellion or resistance. The excruciating wounds inflicted by the bullwhip served as a harsh reminder of the consequences awaiting those who challenged the oppressive system. When the bullwhip struck, it left deep wounds that throbbed long after the physical assault ended. The knotted cords tore through delicate skin layers, leaving behind a trail of blood and raw tissue. Bruises bloomed on the body, creating a grotesque mix of purple, blue, and yellow hues. The enslaved individuals endured the searing pain inflicted by the whip and the enduring visible and invisible scars that bore witness to their suffering. The psychological impact of the bullwhip cannot be underestimated. The terrifying crack of the whip reverberated through the air, instilling fear of impending punishment. This auditory warning struck deep into the hearts of the enslaved, fostering a constant atmosphere of apprehension and subservience. The bullwhip became a chilling symbol of power and control, a haunting reminder of the cruelty and brutality that defined their existence. In addition to physical punishments, psychological torture was employed on slave breeding farms. Enslaved individuals were often subjected to public humiliation and degradation. They could be forced to wear iron collars or shackles, displaying their status as property and reminding them of their powerlessness. Public floggings and brandings were also common, marking the bodies of the enslaved with the initials or symbols of their owners, further stripping them of their individuality and autonomy. In addition, breeding farms used separation and family disruptions as punishment. Those in bondage were forcefully separated from their loved ones, taken away and traded to different plantations or farms. This painful method destroyed their connections and crushed any unity or resistance. Mothers were heartlessly separated from their children, and husbands were forcibly separated from their wives, causing profound sorrow and hopelessness. These actions caused immense emotional pain and were used to subjugate enslaved individuals, preventing organized defiance. By tearing families apart deliberately, it left lasting scars, perpetuating suffering and despair for generations. The psychological trauma inflicted on those living within the slave breeding system cannot be overstated. The constant fear, violence, and degradation they experienced were intended to crush their spirits and maintain control over their lives. The psychological scars of these punishments continued long after the physical wounds had healed. The punishments inflicted on slave breeding farms were heinous and served as tools of control and dehumanization. The enslaved individuals endured unimaginable physical and psychological suffering as they were subjected to whippings, beatings, public humiliation, and heart-wrenching separation from their loved ones. These punishments were designed to maintain a system of oppression and reinforce the notion that the lives of the enslaved were expendable commodities. It's important that we face and acknowledge this dark time in history, recognizing the immense suffering endured by those who experienced unspeakable horrors. By exploring the atrocities of slave breeding farms, we gain a deep understanding of the pain inflicted on individuals. This understanding motivates us to work together toward a fairer and more inclusive future. It drives our determination to create a society where everyone is treated with dignity, their freedom is protected, and they're respected as basic human rights. Through this acknowledgement and remembrance, we honor the resilience and strength of those who survived these unimaginable circumstances. By learning from the past, we equip ourselves with the knowledge to build a better and more compassionate world, ensuring that we don't repeat the mistakes of history and that equality and justice prevail. Thank you for watching our video on the most brutal punishments used on slave breeding farms throughout history. We hope this video has helped to educate and raise awareness about the inhumane treatment of enslaved people and the devastating impact of slavery on generations of African Americans. Stay tuned for more videos.